Hey everybody, Steve here. In this video we're going to be talking about the world, the lost people, and Christians who want to have their cake and eat it too, and that's in regards to the world. And I want to give you some stories, some accounts of after I gave that speech, that speaking engagement at the Evangelism Summit in Denver, along with Water Source Ministries and a bunch of other great people. Not that I'm great, but it was really good to hear and see a lot of people that were engaged in preaching the gospel, preaching Christ crucified, and then actually going out afterwards and practicing what they preach. Now, took the wife and daughter out there, handed out a bunch of tracts. It was really interesting because down in 16th Street Mall District area of Denver, when it started getting late at night and towards that other end of 16th Street, there's a lot of bars, there's restaurants, people were getting more and more drunk. And it was interesting because I was further up by Starbucks up there, and then we kind of worked our way down one side and came back up and then back down and just had a really interesting time. The people I got the most flack from, guess who? Christians. The people I got the least amount of flack or problems from, the unbelievers, the lost. And when we had discussions, I remember having a bunch of discussions with younger people, and really putting, hey, what do you believe? Handing out the $1 million bills and the $1 trillion bills and asking them the $1 million question, well, what do you think's on the other side? After we die and we step off and we shed this mortal coil, what do you think happens? And was able to get into a lot of good discussions. And some people had never heard it before. Some people had heard it but didn't understand why Jesus was the good news. Other people, they were caught in their sin and they knew it. And it's like, we parted ways. There was no hard feelings. What was interesting, though, is I even talked with a Muslim who, unfortunately, when we started discussing, had a long discussion, one of the questions I asked him was, well, do you know if you're going to heaven 100%? He goes, no. He says, I don't. It depends on Allah and how he feels. I try to do my best and hopefully I'll get there. And that's true. If you read the text, you'll find out it's kind of a crapshoot. You don't know if you're going to make it or not. But the problem is when we go back to God and His Word and the gospel, so many things will pop up and persecution will come. Now, I'm not, of course, talking physical persecution here in the United States, but we do see persecution, and that might be a good thing here in the United States if that happened, because then it would really separate the sheep from the goats. But anyway, even got to pray with a Muslim and pray with some people, some believers out there that were drunk and didn't know the answer. They knew a lot of the answers, but they didn't know why Jesus was the good news. And it was interesting. There was two young men there who were out drinking. One reeked of alcohol. He was polite and he was nice, and the other guy, he seemed like maybe 1 or 2 years older. I'd say maybe about 22 to 24 years old, and he was the son of a preacher. So he knew all the right answers. But after the discussion we had, the biggest problem that he had, and he knew all this to be true, is that you can't live the Christian life. He said it was too hard. And, he knew that there was a heaven. He knows that there's a hell. And his problem is, as I kind of figure with a lot, is that they don't want to be disciplined. They don't want to listen to God and His Word. They don't want to follow through and be obedient, but they'd rather bend their knee to greed and corruption and sin and those pleasures that come with sin for a season. So, but didn't have one bad conversation, and gave away a stack of, it must have been over $100 million bill tracts, and had a bunch of discussions with people. And daughter, she handed out about $100 million bill tracts, and the wife was out there, she was doing that too, and each of us came back with some great insight. what was interesting is this was in Denver, and it was 16th Street retail district, eating district, and it's a long street. It's kind of shops on both sides. You know, you got a trolley car that goes back and forth, and or tram car, or whatever you want to call it, little bus action on a track. They had horses with carriages, and people, you know, riding people in like rickshaw, bicycle type things. And up by the Starbucks was, it seems like further away from the drinking establishments, and you would see that you could actually see the levels of compromise and sin as you walked further and further down the street, and as the night continued on. It was really interesting because you had people that, another thing that was really interesting is that down by the Starbucks, you had people who were just kind of like walking around, well, okay, you know, and having some good discussions. Yeah, I didn't know that, or oh, okay, all right. Give them the gospel message, talk with them, ask them questions, see what they think, and then, you know, leave it from there. Leave that seed planted. But it was kind of there was kids and people and adults that were kind of casual and like, you could see that they were trapped. I mean, just like, well, everybody's guilty. But as you proceeded down that street and as the night got further and further on, you would come to different areas where there would be different feelings, there would be a different vibe. And then when you got down to the end of that street where there was a lot of drinking establishments, there was a lot of oppression, there was a different vibe, there was a lot of hurting people. And some people were just angry, but past that outward facade of anger, you could see the hurt, you could see the pain, you could see that, you know, the desperation of, well, why is my life screwed up? Why are things going wrong? You know, my dad or my parents aren't supposed to, you're not supposed to treat children like that. You know, and then it went on to that cycle of abuse and sin and hiding and not having trust in those over you, so why should you trust in God? There's some very good questions that the unbelievers had of, you know, well, how can God let these things happen? And it comes to the point of where, you know, basically that was the biggest question. How can God let all these bad things happen? Well, man is accountable and God is sovereign, and everything will be brought into judgment and everything will be reconciled. And it's us who's going to give an account. And we're responsible for our actions. We're accountable for our actions, not only for our lives, but the lives of our children and those around us. You know, for those people that were involved in, you know, abuse, physical and sexual abuse, and things like that, they ask those questions because that hurts, and I know how that is. Been there, done that. And how can there be a God that's holy and just and would allow things like that to happen to people? The thing is that besides going out and preaching the gospel message, you need to be able to answer questions on why these things happen. And it's okay to say, you know, well, you know, either I've never been in that situation or I don't know the answer, but I do know that Jesus saved me and he fixed me. It wasn't like a storybook ending where you rode off and happily ever after. But there is that peace that he gives and that freedom, that liberty from sin that allows you to continue on and to lean and trust on him. So, and since doing that, even I knew about a week, maybe 2 weeks before the speaking engagement, the other guy told me about it and invited me to speak, that all kinds of bad stuff started happening. You know, back went out. I told you all the problems that I had. That just increased, nightmares, everybody in the family, closer and closer to that date of when I was supposed to speak, just all kinds of stuff goes on. And then yet, it really opened my eyes to that if you are in sound doctrine, okay, there's a disclaimer there, you have to have sound doctrine, you have to be a Christian, you have to follow Jesus, and you start doing the right things, you'll be persecuted. People will talk about you. People will lie about you. They'll gossip you. They'll slander you, as we've seen in recent videos that I've showed you. You know, some people they can't preach the gospel message because it's not the gospel. Because they'll say things like, well, if you don't read the right Bible, you're corrupt and perverted. That's not what this says. Okay, nowhere does it say that. But rather, we are saved by grace and we're saved by Jesus, and having a relationship with Him. And it's interesting because the most arguments and the most problems that I've had are not with the unbelievers, but they're with the people who claim to be Christians. You'll do everything that the world does, and some of you, don't do a lot of the things that the world does, but you won't testify of Jesus. You won't tell your neighbor. You won't tell your friends. And there's got to be something wrong with that. Because if you're in fear of rejection, of your friends and your family rejecting you, or looking down on you, or laughing at you, whatever the case may be, for preaching the gospel, or they quit being your friend, were they really friends to begin with? What's interesting is that not many people do that. And during that talk that I had, I told other people there during that conference. As a matter of fact, it was in my speech whole thing, that I'd only been witnessed to about 3 times during my entire life, and I'm in my mid-40s. Well, when we went out to go witness down in Denver, that somebody came up and they handed me a tract, so that was number 4. And I told them, I said, that's great. And they didn't yell at me. They didn't, say, you fornicator, you sinner, you're going to hell, It was just, hey, did you get one of these? God bless. And then, they went on, and of course, I took it and then looked at it, said, oh, cool, and caught up with them and said, hey, thanks. I guess the question I have is, if you're a Christian and you're a believer, how many times has someone witnessed to you? I mean, think about it. How has somebody ever walked up to you and said, hey, I've got a question to ask you. What do you think happens when we die? Where do you think you're going to go? Not many, right? Think about how many times that you've gone out and witnessed or talked to somebody about Jesus and what He did. Not many, not many at all over here. But then think about all this over here. You've recommended people to buy truck tires, guns, ammo, shoes, purses, sports. You've recommended everything under the sun, 2-for-1 deals at the supermarket, everything except Jesus. Isn't that kind of backwards, how we do that? How we get to the point of where we will argue Scripture and say, well, if you're not reading this version here, you're not really a believer and you're corrupt and perverted. Or no, it's pre-tribulation, or it's post, or it's after, mid, or combination of both, or blah, blah, blah. And we'll talk about all these things, what does it really mean, the taking a camel through the eye of a needle? We'll get so caught up in these little things that we forget to testify about Jesus and preach Christ crucified. I'm not saying that it's easy and no one is perfect, but if you haven't, we need to examine ourselves and see if what we're doing is right and what we believe is right and that our actions are right. Should we be preaching the gospel, or should we be telling lies and gossiping and slandering other people and acting like the world? I don't know. Well, I do know, because Scripture says, it gives an example. But I guess that's what I want to talk about today. What have you recommended and how much? And then look at Jesus and how much you've recommended Him. So anyway, take care. God bless. Peace.